Hi, I'm Hazel. 18 months ago, I left for Afghanistan carrying a medic bag and a promise from my family that they'd be waiting when I came home. 3 days ago, I landed at SeaTac Airport to find an empty terminal and a text message that shattered everything I thought I knew about the people I'd been fighting to protect. My brother Connor had convinced everyone I was a fraud, that my Bronze Star was undeserved, and that I didn't deserve the homecoming they'd planned for months. But he made one crucial mistake. He forgot our mother didn't just raise soldiers. She commands them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the windows of the SeaTac Airport terminal, like it was trying to wash away the last traces of hope I'd carried home from Kandahar. I stood there in my dress blues, duffel bag at my feet, watching families embrace returning soldiers while my phone screen glowed with the most devastating message I'd ever received. The text was from Connor, my older brother, sent just 2 hours before my flight landed. Change of plans, homecoming canceled. Don't come to the house tonight. Mom's orders. Mom's orders. Those 2 words hit harder than any roadside bomb I'd encountered overseas. Admiral Victoria Brennan didn't give casual orders to her children. When she spoke, it carried the weight of 3 decades commanding respect in the Navy, and the authority of someone who'd earned 4 stars on her shoulders through sheer determination and unwavering integrity. But this felt different. This felt wrong. I scrolled up through the message thread, looking for context, for some explanation that would make sense of why the woman who'd written me letters every single week for 18 months would suddenly decide I wasn't welcome home. The last message before Connor's bombshell was from 3 days earlier, when he'd confirmed the time and location for the homecoming ceremony at Veterans Memorial Hall. 200 people were supposed to be there. Fellow veterans, family friends, neighbors who'd watched me grow up dreaming of serving my country just like my mother had. The automatic doors slid open beside me, letting in a gust of Pacific Northwest wind that carried the scent of pine and salt water. Home. I dreamed of that smell every night in the desert, through the choking dust storms and the metallic taste of fear that lingered after incoming mortars. But standing there in the arrivals terminal, surrounded by the joy of other military families reuniting, I felt more alone than I ever had during those long nights on guard duty at Camp Resolute. My hands shook as I dialed Connor's number, straight to voicemail. I tried Tyler, my younger brother, but his phone just rang endlessly. Then I called home, the landline that had been our family's anchor for as long as I could remember. No answer. Finally, I called Mom's direct line at Naval Station Everett, the number she'd given me for emergencies only. A crisp voice answered on the second ring. Admiral Brennan's office, Petty Officer Williams speaking. This is Sergeant Hazel Brennan. I need to speak with Admiral Brennan immediately. A pause. Then, more gently, I'm sorry, Sergeant. The Admiral is in a classified briefing and cannot be disturbed. Can I take a message? Classified briefing. On a Thursday evening, when her daughter was coming home from deployment, I thanked the petty officer and hung up, feeling the last thread of normalcy snap inside my chest. I grabbed my duffel and walked to the rental car counter, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe there was a family emergency. Maybe something had happened to Dad. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But even as I tried to rationalize it, a darker thought crept in. Connor had always resented my decision to enlist. While he'd gone to business school and taken a comfortable job at a tech startup in Seattle, I'd chosen to follow Mom's footsteps into service. He'd called it a phase, said I was just trying to get attention. The drive from the airport to Maple Valley should have been a victory lap, the final mile of a journey that had taken me from basic training at Fort Leonard Wood to the mountains of Afghanistan and back. Instead, it felt like driving toward an execution. The familiar landmarks passed by in a blur of rain-soaked asphalt and streetlights. The grocery store where I'd worked weekends in high school. The park where Tyler and I used to practice throwing footballs while Connor complained we were too loud. The house itself, a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that Dad had spent 3 summers building. All the lights were off. I sat in the rental car for nearly 20 minutes, engine running, heat blasting away the chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. This was supposed to be the moment, the triumphant return. The hero's welcome. Instead, I was staring at my childhood home like it was enemy territory. Finally, I turned off the engine and walked to the front door. My key still worked, which somehow made everything worse. If they'd changed the locks, at least I'd know where I stood. But the key turned smoothly, and I stepped into the darkness of a house that felt nothing like home. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, down to the stack of National Geographic magazines on the coffee table and the throw pillow Mom always positioned at the exact center of the couch. But something was missing, all the photos. Every picture that had included me was gone from the mantelpiece, from the walls, from the side tables. In their place were photos I'd never seen before. Connor at his college graduation, Tyler at his high school baseball games, family vacation pictures that must have been taken while I was deployed. Pictures where I'd been cropped out so seamlessly it was as if I'd never existed. I climbed the stairs to my old room, each step creaking with the familiar sounds of a house I'd once considered my sanctuary. My bedroom door was closed, and for a moment I hesitated, afraid of what I might find. When I finally turned the handle, I found nothing. Not empty. Nothing. The room had been completely cleared out. No bed, no dresser, no trace that Hazel Brennan had ever lived there. The walls were freshly painted a neutral beige, and the carpet showed vacuum marks from a recent cleaning. They'd erased me. I sank down against the wall and finally let myself feel the full weight of what was happening. 18 months of missing birthdays and holidays, of eating MREs while my family enjoyed Mom's famous pot roast, of sleeping in a tent while mortar rounds whistled overhead. All of it had been bearable because I knew I was coming home to people who loved me, people who were proud of me, people who understood that everything I'd sacrificed had been for them. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hazel, it's Zoe Kim. Heard about tonight. I'm at the Anchor if you need somewhere to go. Zoe. Corporal Zoe Kim, my bunkmate for the last 6 months of deployment. She'd returned stateside 3 weeks ahead of me and had been texting regular updates about readjusting to civilian life. I hadn't even known she was still in the area. The Anchor Tavern was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find near a military base. Dim lighting, scarred wooden tables, and walls covered with unit patches and deployment photos. It smelled like beer and stories. The kind of place where veterans could sit and not have to explain the 1,000-yard stare or the way they flinched at sudden noises. Zoe was sitting at a corner booth, still looking like she could field strip a rifle in her sleep despite wearing civilian clothes. She stood when she saw me, and I realized how much I'd missed being around someone who understood what we'd been through together. "You look like hell," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like the same soap we'd all used overseas. "Feel worse." I slid into the booth across from her, grateful for the dim lighting that hid whatever devastation was showing on my face. "Want to talk about it?" I told her everything. The canceled homecoming, the empty house, the missing photos. The way my family had simply deleted me from their lives while I was serving my country on the other side of the world. Zoe listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or taking a sip of her beer, but mostly just being present in the way that only another soldier could. "There's something else," she said when I finished. "Something you need to know." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for. It was a screenshot of a Facebook post from 3 days earlier. Connor's profile, shared publicly. The post showed a photo of him in a suit, standing next to a man I didn't recognize, both of them shaking hands in front of what looked like a corporate banner. The caption read, "Proud to announce my new position as Regional Director for Millennium Defense Contractors. Finally, someone in the Brennan family is serving their country the right way, building the technology that keeps our real heroes safe, instead of playing dress-up soldier for attention. Some people wear the uniform for the right reasons. Others just like the spotlight. #real service, #defense contractor, #truth. I stared at the screen until the words blurred together. Millennium Defense Contractors. I knew that name. They'd been one of the companies competing for a major contract to supply communications equipment to forward operating bases in Afghanistan. Their equipment had failed critical field tests, and the contract had gone to a competitor. 3 soldiers had died in a convoy attack because their radios couldn't reach base for air support. "There's more," Zoe said, her voice gentle but firm. She scrolled to the comments section. Dozens of responses, most of them supportive of Connor's new position. But buried in the thread was a longer comment from Connor himself. posted just hours after his original message. Thanks for all the support, everyone. It's been hard watching my sister chase this military fantasy when she could be contributing to society in meaningful ways. The truth is, her Bronze Star recommendation was inflated. Politics and diversity quotas, not actual heroism. Sometimes family has to make tough choices about enabling destructive behavior. Real patriots work behind the scenes, not in front of cameras. The words hit like a physical blow. Diversity quotas. Inflated recommendation. Destructive behavior. Each phrase felt designed to cut as deeply as possible, to undermine not just my service, but my very identity as a soldier. Zoe, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My Bronze Star wasn't inflated. I know. Her response was immediate and certain. I was there, remember? I was the one who radioed for that medevac while you were performing CPR on Staff Sergeant Rodriguez under fire. I saw you drag him to cover while bullets were hitting the ground around you. I watched you save his life.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The memory came flooding back with crystal clarity. Rodriguez had stepped on an IED while we were treating wounded civilians in a village outside Kandahar. The blast had thrown him 30 feet and torn open his femoral artery. While the rest of the unit provided cover fire, I'd crawled across open ground to reach him, applying a tourniquet while Taliban fighters targeted our position. I'd kept him breathing for 17 minutes until the helicopter arrived, never once leaving his side even when the gunfire intensified. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez was alive today because of those 17 minutes. He was home in El Paso with his wife and 2 daughters, coaching his oldest girl's soccer team and teaching his youngest how to ride a bike. I had the photos he'd sent me to prove it. Family pictures where he smiled with the easy joy of a man who'd been given a second chance at life. Connor's calling that politics and diversity quotas? I asked. Apparently. Zoe's voice carried the kind of anger that only another combat veteran could understand. But here's what he doesn't know. Rodriguez isn't the only one you saved over there. Remember the convoy escort mission in March? When that truck hit the IED and caught fire? I remembered. 3 Afghan National Army soldiers trapped in a burning vehicle while we took small arms fire from multiple directions. I'd gone in twice, pulling out 2 soldiers on the first trip and going back for the third despite the ammunition cooking off inside the truck. Or the time you treated that little girl who stepped on a landmine, Zoe continued. 4 hours of surgery in a field hospital with no electricity, using a flashlight while mortars landed 100 meters away. Each memory felt like armor, protecting me against Connor's lies. These weren't inflated recommendations or diversity quotas. They were moments when training and instinct and sheer determination had made the difference between life and death for people who mattered. Why would he do this? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Because you're everything he's not, Zoe said simply. You earned your respect. You earned your medals. You earned your place at that homecoming ceremony. And tomorrow, when you walk into that Veterans Memorial Hall, everyone's going to see the difference between someone who serves and someone who just talks about serving. Tomorrow, the homecoming ceremony Connor had canceled, the event where 200 people were supposed to welcome me home and celebrate my service. The moment that had been stolen from me by someone who'd never spent a single day in uniform. What if they don't show? I asked. What if Connor convinced everyone that I don't deserve it? Zoe reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Then we'll find out who your real family is. But Hazel, I've got a feeling your mother didn't become a 4-star admiral by letting people lie about her daughter's service record. She was right. Admiral Victoria Brennan had commanded aircraft carriers and submarine fleets. She'd negotiated with foreign admirals and testified before Congress. She'd earned her rank in an era when women had to fight for every promotion, every command, every ounce of respect. Whatever was happening with Connor, whatever lies he'd been spreading, there was no way she'd let them stand unchallenged. I spent that night on Zoe's couch, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together how 18 months of faithful service had led to this moment of complete rejection. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Connor's Facebook post, his dismissive comments about my Bronze Star, his suggestion that I was somehow faking my way through military service for attention. but I also saw Rodriguez's face when he opened his eyes in that medevac helicopter, realizing he was going to live. I saw the Afghan soldiers I'd pulled from that burning truck, alive and breathing because I'd been willing to risk everything for people I barely knew. I saw the little girl in the field hospital, holding my hand while we waited for her father to arrive from Kabul. Connor could lie about my motivations. He could spread rumors about diversity quotas and inflated recommendations. But he couldn't change what had actually happened in those crucial moments when lives hung in the balance. He couldn't erase the people who are alive today because of decisions I'd made under fire. And, most importantly, he couldn't speak for Admiral Victoria Brennan, a woman who'd built her entire career on honor, integrity, and the truth. Morning came with the kind of pale Pacific Northwest sunshine that felt like a promise. I woke up on Zoe's couch with a stiff neck and a clearer head, the fog of confusion and hurt beginning to lift. My phone showed 3 missed calls from an unknown number and a single text message that made my heart race. Sergeant Brennan, this is Petty Officer Williams from Admiral Brennan's office. The Admiral requests your presence at Naval Station Everett at 0800 hours. Dress uniform required. This is not a request. Not a request. In military speak, that meant an order. And Admiral Victoria Brennan didn't give orders lightly. Zoe was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her laptop open. Got your message, she said without looking up. Your mom's office called me too. Apparently, I'm invited to this little meeting. You are? Witness, she said simply. Someone who was actually there for the events your brother is questioning. Funny how that works. When you want to challenge a Bronze Star recommendation, you need people who can speak to the actual facts. I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening of the knot that had been tightening since yesterday. This wasn't just a family meeting. This was an investigation. And Admiral Victoria Brennan had a reputation for very thorough investigations. The drive to Naval Station Everett felt different than the defeated journey to my childhood home. This time, I was traveling toward answers, toward accountability, toward someone who understood the weight of military honor. Zoe rode beside me in silence, both of us understanding that whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just my relationship with my family, but my future as a soldier. The base was exactly as I remembered it. Pristine white buildings arranged with military precision, sailors in working uniforms moving with purpose, the constant background hum of a community dedicated to something larger than itself. I'd grown up visiting this base, watching my mother command respect from officers and enlisted personnel alike. This was where I'd first understood what it meant to serve. Admiral Brennan's office was on the 3rd floor of the main administrative building, behind a door marked simply with her name and rank. Petty Officer Williams, a young woman with sharp eyes and an efficient manner, led us through an outer office lined with commendations and unit photos from Mom's various commands. The walls told the story of a career built on competence and dedication, destroyer commands, carrier air wing assignments, Joint Task Force leadership positions that had taken her from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea. The inner office was smaller than I'd expected, dominated by a mahogany desk that had belonged to my grandfather when he commanded destroyers in the Pacific during World War II. Behind the desk sat Admiral Victoria Brennan, wearing service dress blues with 4 stars gleaming on her shoulder boards. She looked exactly like what she was, someone accustomed to command, someone who'd earned her authority through decades of difficult decisions and unwavering principle. She didn't smile when we entered. She didn't stand. She simply studied us both with the kind of analytical gaze that had probably unnerved admirals from Allied navies during high-stakes negotiations. Sergeant Brennan, she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority I remembered from childhood. Corporal Kim, thank you for coming. Ma'am, I responded, falling automatically into the formal tone that military children learn early. I want to hear about March 15th, she said without preamble. The convoy escort mission. The IED strike. What happened after Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was wounded? This wasn't a reunion. This wasn't a mother welcoming her daughter home from war. This was an admiral conducting an investigation, and she wanted facts, not emotions. I told her everything. The call for medical support, the run across open ground under fire, the arterial bleeding and the improvised tourniquet, the 17 minutes of CPR while Taliban fighters tried to zero in on our position. I told her about Rodriguez's eyes opening in the helicopter, about his steady breathing, about the message from his wife thanking me for bringing him home to his daughters. Zoe corroborated every detail, adding observations I'd forgotten, the way I'd remained calm under fire, the precise medical procedures I'd followed, the leadership I'd shown in organizing the extraction under combat conditions. When we finished, Admiral Brennan sat in silence for nearly a minute, her fingers steepled in front of her face. Finally, she spoke. "Yesterday evening, your brother Connor contacted my office. He claimed that your Bronze Star recommendation had been inflated for political reasons. He suggested that your service record contained inaccuracies, and that your homecoming ceremony should be canceled to avoid embarrassing the family." The words hit like a slap, even though I'd already known about Connor's accusations. Hearing them repeated in my mother's official voice, in her office surrounded by the symbols of her authority, made them feel more real and more devastating. Connor also informed me that he'd taken the liberty of contacting the organizers of your homecoming ceremony and telling them that the family no longer supported the event. He said he was acting with my authority. Acting with her authority. Connor had used Admiral Victoria Brennan's name to cancel my homecoming, to steal the moment I'd earned through 18 months of faithful service and genuine heroism. "Ma'am," I began, but she held up a hand. "I'm not finished, Sergeant. This morning, I contacted Colonel Patricia Valdez at Fort Cascade, who commanded the investigation into your Bronze Star recommendation. I also spoke with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who is currently serving as a drill instructor at Fort Benning. Would you like to know what they told me?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Colonel Valdez informed me that your Bronze Star was not only earned, but that the original recommendation was actually downgraded from a Silver Star due to the political climate surrounding awards for medical personnel. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez told me that you saved his life, and that he's written 17 letters of recommendation for you to various medical schools and military programs." 17 letters. One for every minute I'd kept him breathing while bullets flew overhead. "Your brother," Admiral Brennan continued, "has never served a day in uniform. His new position with Millennium Defense Contractors represents a company that was recently investigated for providing substandard equipment that contributed to the deaths of 3 American soldiers. He is, in short, the last person qualified to judge your service or your character." She stood then, walking to the window that overlooked the base where she commanded thousands of sailors and officers. "But this isn't just about military service, is it? This is about family. This is about a son who resented his sister's courage and tried to destroy her moment of recognition." "Mom," I said, the formal tone finally cracking. She turned back to face me, and for the first time since I'd entered her office, I saw my mother instead of Admiral Brennan. "Hazel, I am so proud of you. I am proud of your service, proud of your courage, and proud of the woman you've become. Your brother's actions do not represent this family or its values. The homecoming ceremony will proceed as planned," she said firmly. "In fact, it will proceed with some additional guests. I've invited Colonel Valdez to attend, along with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who is flying in from Georgia specifically to be there. I've also contacted the local media, because I believe the community deserves to know what real heroism looks like. The relief that washed over me was so intense, it was almost painful. For 24 hours, I'd believed that my family had rejected everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd achieved. Now I understood that my real family, the one that mattered, had never wavered in their support. "What about Connor?" Zoe asked. Admiral Brennan's expression hardened. "Connor will be attending the ceremony as well. He will publicly apologize for his lies and his unauthorized use of my name and authority. He will explain to the community that his sister earned every honor she's received. And he will do it because the alternative is facing charges for impersonating a naval officer." Impersonating a naval officer. I'd almost forgotten that using someone's military rank and authority without permission was a federal crime, one that could result in serious prison time. After the ceremony, my mother continued, "Connor and I will have a private conversation about family loyalty and the consequences of betraying someone who served with honor. That conversation will determine whether he remains welcome in this family." The woman who'd given Connor life was prepared to cut him out of it if necessary. The admiral who'd commanded fleets and task forces was willing to sacrifice her own son to defend her daughter's honor. "Ma'am," I said, standing at attention, "thank you." She walked around the desk and, for the first time since I'd returned from deployment, hugged me like a mother instead of addressing me like a subordinate. "Welcome home, Sergeant Brennan," she whispered. "Now let's go show this community what a real hero looks like." The next morning brought a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since stepping off the transport plane at SeaTac. I woke up in the guest quarters at Naval Station Everett, surrounded by the familiar sounds of a military base coming to life. Reveille echoing across the compound, the steady rhythm of boots on pavement, the distant hum of aircraft engines warming up for morning flights. After 18 months of sleeping in a tent where mortar attacks could shatter your dreams at any moment, the predictable routine of base life felt like a lullaby. Admiral Brennan had insisted I stay on base rather than return to Zoe's couch or face the emptiness of my childhood home. "You're a returning combat veteran," she'd said with the kind of finality that ended discussions. "You deserve quarters that reflect your service, not a friend's living room." The BOQ room was simple but dignified. A single bed with military crisp linens, a small desk positioned beneath a window that looked out over the flight line, and a dresser where I'd carefully arranged my dress uniform for the ceremony that was now just hours away. On the nightstand sat my bronze star in its presentation case, the metal catching the morning light filtering through the blinds. Next to it, my phone displayed 3 missed calls from Connor and a series of increasingly frantic text messages. "Hazel, we need to talk before tonight. Mom's overreacting. You know how she gets about military stuff. This is getting out of hand. Call me back. People are asking questions about Millennium Defense. This needs to stop." That last message had arrived at 3 in the morning, and it told me everything I needed to know. Connor wasn't concerned about family relationships or hurt feelings. He was worried about his new job, about the attention my mother's investigation might bring to his defense contractor employer, the same company whose faulty equipment had contributed to American casualties overseas. I deleted the messages without responding and headed to the base mess hall for breakfast. The dining facility was exactly what you'd expect on a naval installation: efficient service, no-nonsense food, and conversations conducted in the clipped tones of people accustomed to getting things done quickly. I found a table near the windows and tried to eat scrambled eggs while processing the magnitude of what was about to happen. Today wasn't just about a homecoming ceremony anymore. It had become something larger, something that would define not just my relationship with my family but my understanding of what family actually meant. The brother who'd shared my childhood, who'd taught me to throw a curveball and helped me with algebra homework, had tried to destroy the most important moment of my adult life. Meanwhile, the mother who'd sometimes seemed more comfortable commanding fleets than attending school plays had marshaled the full weight of her authority to defend my honor. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see a familiar face: Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera, someone I'd served with during the middle months of my deployment. Marcus was one of those soldiers who seemed to carry calm with him wherever he went, the kind of steady presence that made everyone around him feel safer. He'd been wounded by shrapnel during a convoy escort mission and medically evacuated 3 months before my rotation ended. "Marcus," I said, standing to embrace him, "what are you doing here?" "Your mother called my commanding officer," he said with a grin that transformed his serious face. "Apparently tonight's ceremony needed some additional witnesses to your character." Colonel Patterson was more than happy to approve emergency leave for someone who saved his medic's life. His medic. I'd almost forgotten that Marcus had been transporting Corporal Janet Chen when their Humvee hit an IED. Chen had suffered severe burns and internal injuries, and I'd spent 6 hours in surgery helping the field surgeon stabilize her for transport to Germany. She'd made a full recovery and was now serving as a trauma nurse at Walter Reed. "How many people did Admiral Brennan contact?" I asked. "Let's just say tonight's going to be interesting," Marcus replied, settling into the chair across from me. "Rodriguez flew in from Georgia yesterday. Chen's driving up from Joint Base Lewis McChord. Lieutenant Colonel Williams from the Medical Battalion is coming. Even Captain Hassan from the Afghan National Army. Apparently, he's in the States for training exercises and heard about the ceremony." Captain Hassan. I remembered him well. a quiet, competent officer who'd coordinated with our medical team during civilian casualty events. He'd been present during several of the missions Connor was now questioning, including the day I'd treated the little girl who'd stepped on a landmine. "This is becoming a major production," I said, feeling a mix of gratitude and anxiety. "Your mother doesn't do anything halfway," Marcus observed. "But Hazel, there's something else. Something you should know before tonight." His tone had shifted, becoming more serious. I set down my coffee cup and waited. "Rodriguez and I were talking yesterday after he landed about Connor's Facebook post, about the things he's been saying regarding your Bronze Star. We did some research into Millennium Defense contractors." "What kind of research?" Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through several screenshots. "The communications equipment that failed during the Ghazni convoy attack last spring? The radios that couldn't reach base when Lieutenant Morrison's unit came under fire? That was Millennium Defense hardware. The Ghazni attack? 3 soldiers killed, 7 wounded, because their radio equipment had malfunctioned during a critical firefight. The subsequent investigation had been classified, but every medic in theater had heard the stories. Good soldiers dying because their calls for air support never reached friendly forces. There's more," Marcus continued. "Millennium Defense has been lobbying for expanded contracts despite their equipment failures. They're claiming that field conditions in Afghanistan are too harsh for reliable performance, that the military's standards are unrealistic. And Connor's their new regional director, which means he's now professionally invested in downplaying the severity of equipment failures that have cost American lives, including the lives of soldiers you've saved." The irony was staggering. Connor had questioned my Bronze Star while taking a job with a company whose negligence had created the very combat situations where medals like mine were earned. He was profiting from the deaths of soldiers while simultaneously undermining the recognition given to those who'd tried to save them. "Does Admiral Brennan know about this?" "I suspect she knows more than she's told you," Marcus said carefully. "Your mother didn't build her career by failing to research the people who attack her family." We finished breakfast in relative silence, both of us understanding that the evening's ceremony had implications far beyond a simple homecoming celebration. This was becoming a reckoning, a public examination of what constituted real service versus hollow patriotism, genuine heroism versus manufactured controversy. Around midday, I received a call from Petty Officer Williams, asking me to return to Admiral Brennan's office. When I arrived, I found the outer office bustling with activity, staff officers reviewing files, communications personnel coordinating with local media, and what appeared to be a security detail preparing for a high-profile event. Admiral Brennan was standing behind her desk studying a thick folder when I entered. She looked up as I approached, and I could see the controlled fury that had been building since yesterday's revelations. "Sit down, Hazel," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We need to discuss what's going to happen tonight, and what's going to happen afterward." I took the offered seat, noting that she'd closed the office door behind me, a sign that this conversation was going to be more personal than professional. "First, the ceremony itself," she began. "Veterans Memorial Hall has been secured. Local police are providing traffic control, because we're expecting significantly more attendees than originally planned. The mayor will be present, along with both of our congressional representatives and approximately 30 members of the local media." 30 members of the media. What had started as a small community celebration for a returning combat veteran was now becoming a regional news event. "Second, your brother Connor will be present, as will your father and Tyler. Connor has been informed that he will publicly acknowledge his errors and apologize for his misrepresentations. He has also been informed that his cooperation is not optional. What happens if he refuses?" Admiral Brennan's smile was the kind that probably terrified foreign diplomats during tense negotiations. "Connor is many things, but he's not stupid. He understands that his choice is between public embarrassment and federal prosecution for impersonating a naval officer. And after tonight? That depends largely on Connor's behavior. If he demonstrates genuine remorse and a commitment to repairing the damage he's caused, he may remain part of this family. If he continues to prioritize his professional interests over family loyalty, then he'll discover that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt." The finality in her voice left no doubt that she meant exactly what she said. Admiral Victoria Brennan had spent 3 decades making difficult decisions in high-pressure situations. Cutting ties with a disloyal son would be painful, but it wouldn't be beyond her capabilities. "There's something else," she continued, opening the folder on her desk. "Something I've been investigating since yesterday's conversation." She handed me a document marked with official seals and classification stamps. It was a Department of Defense investigation report titled, quote, "Equipment Failure Analysis, Millennium Defense Contractors Communication Systems, Operation Enduring Freedom." This investigation was completed 6 months ago, Admiral Brennan explained. It found that Millennium Defense knowingly submitted substandard equipment for field testing, falsified performance data, and continued marketing products they knew were likely to fail under combat conditions. I scanned the document, recognizing locations and unit designations from my own deployment. The investigation had been thorough and damning, documenting multiple instances where Millennium Defense equipment had failed at critical moments, contributing to casualty rates and compromising mission effectiveness. The report was classified to protect ongoing legal proceedings. My mother continued, "But it's being declassified next week as part of congressional hearings into defense contractor accountability." Connor's new employer is about to face very public scrutiny for their role in preventable military casualties. Does Connor know? I doubt Millennium Defense has been transparent with their new regional director about their legal vulnerabilities. But he'll learn soon enough, along with the rest of the country. The implications were staggering. Connor had not only attacked my military service, but he'd done so while taking a job with a company that was directly responsible for endangering the soldiers I'd served alongside. His defense contractor salary was essentially blood money, paid by a corporation that had prioritized profits over the lives of American service members. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because tonight isn't just about defending your honor," Admiral Brennan replied. "It's about exposing the difference between those who serve with integrity and those who profit from the sacrifice of others." Connor chose to make this public. Now he'll face the public consequences. I spent the afternoon in my quarters, pressing my dress uniform and preparing for what felt more like a military tribunal than a homecoming celebration. The weight of the evening ahead pressed down on me. Not just the personal confrontation with Connor, but the knowledge that my family's private dysfunction was about to become a very public examination of military values and family loyalty. Around 4 o'clock, Zoe arrived with a garment bag containing her own dress uniform. "Thought you might want some moral support while getting ready," she said, settling onto the spare chair in my room. "This has gotten so much bigger than I expected," I admitted, adjusting the ribbon rack on my uniform blouse. "Good," Zoe replied firmly. "Connor made this public when he posted those lies on Facebook. He made it bigger when he used your mother's authority to cancel your homecoming. Now he gets to face the consequences in front of the same community he tried to turn against you." She was right, but that didn't make the prospect any less daunting. In a few hours, I'd be standing in front of hundreds of people, family, friends, neighbors, media representatives, while my personal story became a very public lesson about honor, service, and the price of betrayal. At 5:30, a staff car arrived to transport us to Veterans Memorial Hall. The driver was a young petty officer who maintained professional silence during the 20-minute drive, but I could see him stealing glances in the rearview mirror. Word had clearly spread throughout the base that something significant was happening tonight. Veterans Memorial Hall was a stately brick building dating back to the 1940s, built to honor the local service members who'd fought in World War II. The parking lot was already full when we arrived, with overflow vehicles lining the nearby streets. The conversation continued in this vein for several more minutes, everyone performing their roles in the Family Harmony Theater, while carefully avoiding any reference to the conflicts that had brought us to this point. It was exhausting and artificial, but it was also necessary to get through the evening without creating a scene that would overshadow my parents' anniversary. As the cocktail hour progressed, I found myself relaxing slightly. Lily was being admired by relatives and family friends, behaving perfectly as she charmed adults with her vocabulary and manners. Mark circulated through the room with easy confidence, engaging in conversations about Coast Guard operations and community service that reminded everyone present exactly who they were dealing with. But I should have known that Vanessa wouldn't be content with a peaceful evening. The first sign of trouble came during dinner, when I noticed that our assigned table was positioned at the far edge of the room, away from the head table where my parents sat with their closest friends and family members. The seating arrangement was clearly intentional, designed to minimize Lily's visibility during the formal parts of the evening. It was subtle enough that most guests wouldn't notice, but obvious enough to send a message about our family's relative importance in Vanessa's hierarchy. "Interesting table placement," Mark observed quietly as we took our seats. "Feels like we're being managed." "At least we're together," I replied, settling Lily in her booster seat and helping her arrange her napkin. "And she can't control how we behave from over there." The dinner service proceeded smoothly, with Lily eating her meal with minimal assistance and charming our table mates with her polite conversation. I was beginning to think that we might actually get through the evening without incident when the speeches began. Dad spoke first, thanking everyone for celebrating with them and sharing some humorous stories about 40 years of marriage that had the entire room laughing. Mom followed with her own remarks about family, love, and the importance of having people who supported you through life's challenges. Then Vanessa took the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone comfortable with public speaking. "As many of you know, I had the privilege of organizing tonight's celebration, and I wanted to share some thoughts about what family means." The opening was standard enough, but something in Vanessa's tone put me on high alert. Mark must have sensed it too, because I felt his hand find mine under the table, a silent reminder to stay calm and document whatever was about to happen. "Family," Vanessa continued, "is about more than just blood relationships. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and the willingness to put the good of the group above individual desires." The words sounded noble on the surface, but I could hear the subtext clearly. Vanessa was positioning herself as the defender of family values against those who would prioritize their own wants over group harmony. "Sometimes," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room but lingering pointedly on our table, "family members face difficult decisions about how to balance personal preferences with what's best for everyone involved." Several guests were beginning to look uncomfortable, sensing that this speech was heading somewhere beyond standard anniversary celebration remarks. But Vanessa was too skilled a speaker to make her intentions obvious to casual observers. "Tonight, as we celebrate Mom and Dad's remarkable marriage, I want to acknowledge the sacrifices that family members make for each other. The willingness to compromise, to consider the broader impact of our choices, to sometimes put aside what we want for what the family needs." Mark's grip on my hand tightened slightly. Vanessa was setting up some kind of public statement about family loyalty and sacrifice, and given our recent conflicts, it was clearly intended to paint our resistance to her demands as selfish individualism. "Which is why," Vanessa continued, her voice taking on a tone of regretful disappointment, "it's sometimes necessary to make difficult decisions about who truly belongs at family celebrations." The room had gone completely quiet now, with guests sensing that something significant was happening but not quite understanding what. My parents looked confused and concerned, clearly not knowing where Vanessa's speech was heading. "Family celebrations are about creating memories that will last for generations," Vanessa said, her gaze now fixed directly on Lily, who was sitting quietly in her booster seat, completely unaware that she was being discussed. The blast threw me 30 feet and severed my femoral artery. I was bleeding out in the middle of a Taliban kill zone, while enemy fighters targeted our position. The hall was absolutely silent as Rodriguez described those terrifying minutes when his life had hung in the balance. Sergeant Brennan left the safety of her covered position and crawled across open ground under fire to reach me. She applied a tourniquet while bullets hit the ground around us, then performed CPR for 17 minutes until medical evacuation arrived. "I am alive today because Hazel Brennan was willing to risk her life to save mine." He paused, looking directly at Connor before continuing. "Anyone who questions her courage, her integrity, or her worthiness to wear the uniform doesn't understand what it means to serve. Hazel Brennan is the finest soldier I've ever had the privilege to serve alongside, and I would trust her with my life without hesitation." The applause that followed was thunderous, sustained, and pointed. People weren't just showing appreciation for Rodriguez's testimony. They were demonstrating their rejection of the lies that had been told about my service. Admiral Brennan returned to the lectern as Rodriguez took his seat. We also have with us tonight Corporal Janet Chen, who was critically wounded during a separate incident where Sergeant Brennan's medical skills made the difference between life and death. Chen approached the microphone with the confident stride of someone who'd recovered fully from injuries that could have ended her career. Her testimony was clinical and precise, describing the field surgery that had stabilized her for transport to Germany, the hours of careful treatment that had prevented permanent damage, the professionalism I demonstrated under the most challenging conditions imaginable. One by one, Admiral Brennan called forward the witnesses she'd assembled. Captain Hassan speaking through an interpreter about the Afghan civilians whose lives I'd saved, Lieutenant Colonel Williams describing my performance during mass casualty events, Marcus detailing the convoy rescue where I'd pulled burning soldiers from their vehicle while ammunition cooked off around us. Each testimony built upon the previous one, creating an overwhelming portrait of competence, courage, and commitment that stood in stark contrast to Connor's baseless accusations. By the time the final witness had spoken, Connor looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Now, Admiral Brennan announced, "I'd like to invite Connor Brennan to address the assembly." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Connor remained seated for several long seconds, clearly hoping that somehow he might avoid this moment of public accountability. But every eye in the hall was fixed on him, and the weight of expectation made resistance impossible. He stood slowly and walked to the lectern, his confident demeanor replaced by something approaching panic. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I want to apologize," he began, then stopped to clear his throat. "I want to apologize to my sister Hazel, to this community, and to everyone who serves in our military." The words came out stilted and rehearsed, like someone reading from a script they'd been forced to memorize. I made statements about Hazel's service that were completely unfounded. I questioned achievements that were earned through genuine heroism. I allowed my personal feelings to cloud my judgment, and I acted in ways that were disrespectful to everyone who wears the uniform. He paused again, glancing back toward where Admiral Brennan stood with her arms crossed and her expression unforgiving. Hazel's Bronze Star was earned through courage and skill that I could never match. She has served with honor, and she deserves the recognition and respect of this community. I was wrong to suggest otherwise, and I apologize without reservation. The apology was clearly coerced, lacking any genuine emotion or understanding of the damage he'd caused. But it was public, recorded by multiple television cameras, and witnessed by hundreds of people who would remember his words long after the ceremony ended. When Connor returned to his seat, Admiral Brennan took the lectern for the final time. "Sergeant Hazel Brennan," she called out, "would you please join me?" I stood and walked to the front of the hall, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking my movement. When I reached the lectern, Admiral Brennan stepped aside and gestured for me to address the crowd. For a moment, I couldn't find words. The events of the past few days, the canceled homecoming, the family betrayal, the discovery of Connor's defense contractor connections, had left me emotionally exhausted. But looking out at the assembled faces, seeing the genuine respect and support from my community, I felt something shift inside my chest. 3 days ago, I came home from Afghanistan expecting a quiet ceremony with family and friends. Instead, I found myself defending 18 months of faithful service against accusations that had no basis in fact. My voice grew stronger as I continued, drawing confidence from the supportive faces before me. I didn't serve for recognition or medals. I served because I believed in something larger than myself. I served because I wanted to make a difference in the world, to help people who couldn't help themselves, to honor the uniform that my mother and grandfather wore with such distinction. I looked directly at Connor as I spoke the next words. The soldiers I served with, people like Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Corporal Chen, they understood what real service means. They understood that when the bullets start flying, what matters isn't your politics or your background or your connections. What matters is your willingness to put others before yourself. The hall was absolutely silent, every person hanging on my words. I'm grateful for this opportunity to set the record straight, but I'm even more grateful for the reminder of what family really means. Family isn't just the people who share your DNA. Family is the people who stand by you when everything falls apart. Family is the people who see you for who you really are, not who they want you to be. I looked toward Admiral Brennan, toward Zoe and Marcus, toward the soldiers who'd traveled across the country to testify on my behalf. Tonight I'm surrounded by my real family. Thank you all for welcoming me home. The applause that followed was different from what had come before. Warmer, more personal, tinged with emotion that went beyond simple appreciation for military service. These people weren't just clapping for a returning veteran. They were celebrating the triumph of truth over lies, of integrity over convenience, of genuine honor over empty performance. As the crowd began to disperse, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers, childhood teachers who remembered me as a determined young girl, neighbors who'd watched me grow up dreaming of military service, veterans who understood the weight of what I'd experienced overseas. Each conversation felt like a small healing, a reminder that Connor's lies had never really taken root in the community that knew me best. Near the back of the hall, I spotted Connor standing alone while Dad and Tyler spoke with Admiral Brennan. He looked lost, diminished by the evening's events, finally understanding the full cost of his betrayal. When our eyes met across the crowded room, I saw something that might have been remorse, but it was too late for apologies to bridge the gap he'd created. The brother who taught me to throw a curveball and helped with algebra homework was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone who'd chosen professional advantage over family loyalty. Someone who'd attacked the very values our mother had spent her life defending. As we prepared to leave the hall, Admiral Brennan approached me with an expression that mixed maternal pride with professional satisfaction. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Vindicated?" I replied. "But also sad. I never wanted it to come to this." "Connor made his choices," she said firmly. "Now he'll live with the consequences. But Hazel, I want you to know something. Tonight wasn't just about defending your honor. It was about demonstrating to this community what real leadership looks like. You showed grace under pressure, dignity in the face of betrayal, and commitment to truth even when it was painful." She paused, studying my face with the analytical gaze that had intimidated foreign admirals during diplomatic negotiations. "Those are the qualities that make great officers. Have you given any thought to making the military a career?" The question caught me off guard. During my deployment, I'd assumed I would complete my enlistment and return to civilian life, perhaps using the GI Bill to attend medical school. But tonight had reminded me of something I'd forgotten during the chaos of the past few days. I belonged in uniform. I belonged among people who understood service, sacrifice, and the weight of genuine responsibility. "I have now," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Admiral Brennan smiled, the first purely maternal expression I'd seen from her since my return from deployment. "Good," she said, "because the Navy needs officers like you. Officers who understand that rank and responsibility are earned, not given. Officers who know the difference between serving others and serving themselves." As we walked toward the parking lot, I realized that Connor's betrayal had accomplished something he never intended. It had forced me to examine my own values, to articulate what service really meant, to understand the depth of my commitment to something larger than personal comfort or convenience. The homecoming he'd tried to steal had become something more meaningful than anything I could have imagined, a public affirmation of everything I'd worked to become, witnessed by a community that understood the true cost of honor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Connor would have to face the consequences of his choices, both within our family and at Millennium Defense Contractors, when their equipment failures became public knowledge. Tyler would begin his own journey toward military service, hopefully with a clearer understanding of what that commitment really meant. And I would begin the process of deciding whether to make the Navy my permanent home. But tonight, driving back to the base under a clear Pacific Northwest sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced since leaving Afghanistan: complete certainty about who I was and what I represented. The uniform I wore wasn't just clothing or costume. It was a symbol of everything I'd earned through courage, competence, and unwavering commitment to others. Connor could question my motives, attack my character, and spread lies about my service. But he couldn't change the fundamental truth that had been demonstrated tonight in front of hundreds of witnesses. Some people wear the uniform because they're called to serve. while others simply talk about service from the safety of corporate boardrooms. I knew which category I belonged to, and so did everyone who mattered. The morning after the ceremony brought an unexpected silence to my quarters at Naval Station Everett. For the first time in months, my phone wasn't buzzing with urgent messages or military communications. Instead, it sat quietly on the nightstand beside a stack of business cards from reporters who'd attended the previous evening's events. The local news had run the story as their lead segment, and I'd already received calls from 3 national networks interested in following up on what they were calling a powerful story of military honor versus corporate greed. I wasn't ready for that level of attention. The ceremony had been emotionally draining enough without adding the complexity of national media coverage. What I needed was time to process everything that had changed in the space of a few days. My relationship with my family, my understanding of what home meant, and my growing certainty that the military offered something I couldn't find in civilian life. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Tyler standing in the hallway, wearing his high school letterman jacket and looking younger than his 18 years. His face carried the weight of someone who'd witnessed something he didn't fully understand but knew was significant. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I gestured him inside, noting how he took in the sparse military furnishings of the BOQ room. Tyler had always been the quiet one in our family, content to let Connor and me occupy the spotlight while he focused on baseball and his plans for college. Seeing him here, on a military base, seeking out a conversation with his sister, felt like a shift in the family dynamic that had been building since my return. "How are you handling all this?" I asked, settling into the desk chair while he took the bed. "I don't know," he admitted. "Last week, everything seemed normal. Connor was excited about his new job, you were coming home from deployment, and the family was planning this big celebration. Now Connor's apologizing on television, Mom's talking about disowning him, and Dad won't even discuss what happened." Tyler's confusion was understandable. At 18, he was still forming his own understanding of adult relationships and family loyalty. The events of the past few days had shattered his assumptions about the people he'd grown up trusting. "What Connor did," I said carefully, "wasn't about you or Dad, or even really about me. It was about his own insecurities and his inability to handle someone else's success." "But why?" Tyler's question carried genuine bewilderment. "You saved people's lives. You earned that medal. Why would he try to take that away from you?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with myself. Connor and I had grown up in the same house, raised by the same parents, exposed to the same values. Yet somewhere along the way, he'd developed a worldview that prioritized personal advancement over family loyalty, corporate success over genuine service. "I think Connor's been competing with me his entire life," I said. "When we were kids, it was grades and sports and who got more attention from Mom and Dad. As adults, it became about career achievements and social status. When I enlisted, he saw it as another competition he couldn't win. So he tried to cheat?" The simplicity of Tyler's assessment was startling in its accuracy. Connor had essentially tried to cheat, lying about my accomplishments, undermining my reputation, using Mom's authority without permission. It was the behavior of someone who'd never learned that real success couldn't be stolen from others. "Yeah," I said, "he tried to cheat. And when you cheat in the military, when you lie about service and sacrifice, there are consequences." Tyler was quiet for several minutes, processing this new understanding of his oldest brother. Finally, he spoke again. "I've been thinking about enlisting after graduation." Before all this happened, Connor said it was a waste of time, that smart people find better ways to serve their country. But watching you last night, listening to those soldiers talk about what you did for them, that seems like the most important kind of service there is. His words hit me with unexpected force. Tyler had been considering military service, and Connor had tried to discourage him. How many other young people had Connor influenced with his dismissive attitude toward military careers? How many potential soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines had been steered away from service by someone who'd never worn a uniform himself? "Military service isn't for everyone," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But for those who are called to it, there's nothing more meaningful." You get to be part of something larger than yourself, to make decisions that genuinely matter, to work alongside people who share your commitment to something beyond personal gain. Is that what you're going to do? Make it a career? The question I'd been avoiding since my conversation with Admiral Brennan the night before. Staying in the military would mean embracing a life of frequent moves, dangerous deployments, and constant readiness for whatever challenges the nation might face. It would mean choosing service over comfort, duty over convenience, commitment over personal freedom. I think so, I heard myself say, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Last night reminded me why I enlisted in the first place. It's not about the recognition or the ceremonies. It's about being part of an institution that stands for something permanent in a world that changes constantly. Tyler nodded, though I could see he was still processing the implications of his own potential decision. Choosing military service at 18 meant committing to a path that would shape every aspect of his adult life, from where he lived, to whom he married, to how he measured success and failure. Mom would support whatever you decide, I told him, but make sure it's your decision, not something you're doing to prove a point to Connor or anyone else. After Tyler left, I found myself alone with thoughts I'd been pushing aside since returning from deployment. The ceremony had provided closure regarding Connor's betrayal, but it had also raised larger questions about my future and my relationship with a family that seemed to be fracturing along lines I'd never anticipated. My phone rang, displaying Dad's number. I hesitated before answering, unsure what to expect from someone who'd remained largely silent during the previous evening's confrontations. Hazel? His voice sounded tired, older than I remembered. Hi, Dad. I wanted to call and apologize. For not speaking up last night, for not defending you when Connor started spreading his lies, for not being the father you deserved during all this. Diane Brennan had always been the quiet parent, content to let Admiral Brennan handle the major decisions while he focused on his work as a civilian contractor and his role as the family's emotional anchor. His apology surprised me with its directness. You don't need to apologize, Dad. This wasn't your fight. Yes, it was, he said firmly. When someone attacks my daughter's honor, when they question her service and sacrifice, it absolutely is my fight. I should have shut Connor down the moment he started questioning your mettle. I should have been at that airport when you landed. I should have been the father of a war hero, not a silent bystander. The pain in his voice was evident, and I realized that Connor's betrayal had wounded more than just me. It had fractured the entire family structure, forcing everyone to choose sides in a conflict that never should have existed. Where do we go from here? I asked. I don't know, Dad admitted. Connor's behavior has been unforgivable, but he's still my son. Your mother is talking about cutting him off completely, and maybe that's what needs to happen. But watching your family tear itself apart over lies and jealousy, it's not what I imagined when you kids were growing up. Connor made his choices, Dad. We're all dealing with the consequences. I know. But Hazel, I want you to know something. Last night, watching those soldiers talk about what you did for them, seeing the respect in their eyes when they looked at you, I've never been prouder to be your father. You've become exactly the kind of person your mother and I hoped you'd be. After we ended the call, I sat in the quiet of my quarters and tried to envision what the next phase of my life might look like. The military offered clear paths for advancement, officer candidate school, specialized training programs, leadership positions that would challenge me in ways civilian careers never could. But it also meant accepting a life of uncertainty, of constant deployment possibilities, of putting service before personal comfort. The decision was interrupted by another knock at my door. This time it was Zoe, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of determined expression that meant she had something important to discuss. We need to talk about what happens next, she said, settling into the desk chair I'd vacated. The ceremony was great, Connor got what he deserved, and your family situation is sorted out. But now you have to decide what you're going to do with the rest of your life. I've been thinking about staying in, making it a career. Good. Because I've been thinking the same thing, and I have a proposition for you. Zoe had always been direct, but there was something different in her tone now, a seriousness that suggested she'd been planning this conversation for days. Officer candidate school, she continued, We both have bachelor's degrees, exemplary service records, and combat experience. We could go through OCS together, get commissioned as officers, and shape the next generation of soldiers. The idea was appealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Going through officer training with someone who understood my background, my experiences, and my commitment to service would provide continuity in a life that had been marked by constant change. What made you decide? The same thing that's been influencing your decision, Zoe replied. This week reminded me why I enlisted in the first place. When your brother attacked your service, he was attacking something sacred. The idea that civilian defense contractors can question the valor of combat veterans, that corporate interests can undermine military honor. It's exactly the kind of attitude that needs to be challenged by people who understand what service really means. She was right. Connor's behavior represented something larger than personal jealousy or family dysfunction. It reflected a broader cultural divide between those who served and those who profited from service, between those who understood sacrifice and those who merely talked about it from positions of safety and comfort. There's something else, Zoe continued. I've been researching Millennium Defense contractors since the ceremony. Their contract failures go beyond what we discussed yesterday. They've been systematically over-promising and under-delivering on critical equipment while lobbying for reduced testing standards. How systematic? According to the congressional investigation that's about to go public, Millennium Defense has a pattern of submitting low bids for contracts they know they can't fulfill properly, then claiming that field conditions are too demanding for reliable performance. They've essentially been using American soldiers as beta testers for equipment they know is likely to fail. The scope of the company's misconduct was staggering. Connor hadn't just taken a job with a defense contractor. He'd joined an organization that was actively endangering the lives of people like me, like Rodriguez, like every soldier who depended on reliable equipment in combat situations. And Connor's their new regional director, which means he's going to be responsible for defending their practices when the congressional hearings begin next month. Does he know? I doubt they've briefed him on the full extent of their legal problems. But he's about to become the public face of a company that's directly responsible for preventable military casualties. The same company that's now questioning the valor of the soldiers they've endangered. The irony was almost too perfect. Connor had attacked my Bronze Star while accepting a salary from a corporation whose negligence had created the very situations where medals like mine were earned. He would now have to spend his professional life defending practices that had cost American lives. What's his alternative, if he resigns now, before the hearings begin? Financial ruin, probably. I looked into his situation. He's leveraged heavily on his new salary, just bought a house in an expensive Seattle neighborhood, has student loans from business school. He can't afford to quit, even if he wanted to. Connor was trapped, financially bound to a company whose practices he would soon have to defend in front of congressional committees and national media. Every day he remained employed by Millennium Defense would further implicate him in their culture of prioritizing profits over soldier safety. He made his bed, I said, though I felt a flicker of sympathy for someone who'd stumbled into a situation far more complex than he'd understood. He did. But Hazel, this gives you an opportunity to make a real difference. As an officer, you could influence procurement decisions, equipment testing standards, contractor accountability measures. You could help ensure that what happened with Millennium Defense doesn't happen again. The prospect was compelling. Military officers at the right levels could influence the systems that determined which companies received defense contracts, what standards they had to meet, how thoroughly their equipment was tested before being deployed to combat zones. I could potentially save lives by ensuring that future soldiers weren't endangered by corporate greed and systematic negligence. When would we need to apply for OCS? Applications are due next month for the spring class. If we're accepted, we'd report to Officer Candidate School in Rhode Island next April. 6 months to prepare for the next phase of my life. 6 months to finalize my decision, complete the application process, and say goodbye to enlisted life. It seemed both too long and not nearly enough time to process everything that had changed since my return from deployment. I'm in, I said, surprising myself with the speed of the decision. Let's do it. Zoe's grin transformed her serious expression into something approaching joy. Good. Because I already printed out the application packets. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing the requirements for officer candidate school, physical fitness standards, academic prerequisites, leadership recommendations, medical examinations. The process was thorough and demanding, designed to select candidates who possessed not just the technical qualifications for commissioned service, but the character and judgment necessary for military leadership. As we worked through the paperwork, I found myself thinking about the different paths my life could have taken. I could have completed my enlistment and returned to civilian life, used the GI Bill to attend medical school, built a comfortable career treating patients in suburban hospitals. It would have been a good life, meaningful in its own way, free from the uncertainties and dangers of military service. But it wouldn't have been the life I was meant to live. The events of the past week had clarified something I'd been struggling to understand since returning from deployment. I belonged in uniform. I belonged among people who understood service, sacrifice, and the weight of responsibility for others' lives. Late that afternoon, Admiral Brennan requested my presence in her office one final time before I returned to my regular duties. When I arrived, I found her reviewing what appeared to be personnel files. Her reading glasses perched on her nose in a way that made her look more like a scholar than a fleet commander. "Sit down, Hazel," she said, gesturing to the familiar chair across from her desk. "I want to discuss your future. I've decided to apply for officer candidate school, ma'am. I know. Zoe Kim called my office an hour ago, requesting letters of recommendation for both of you." Her slight smile suggested approval. "I think it's an excellent decision, but I want to make sure you understand what you're committing to. A career in the Navy. More than that, a career in leadership. As an enlisted medic, your responsibility was primarily to the soldiers in your immediate care. As an officer, your responsibility will extend to hundreds or thousands of service members, their families, their training, their welfare, their success and failure." The weight of that responsibility was sobering. Leading other people's children, making decisions that could affect their safety and their futures, accepting accountability for outcomes beyond my direct control. "I'm ready for that," I said, though I wasn't entirely certain I understood what I was claiming to be ready for. "I believe you are. But Hazel, I want you to understand something else. This week's events, Connor's behavior, the way this family has had to examine its values, that's given you insights that many officers never develop. You understand the difference between genuine service and performance. You understand how personal integrity affects professional effectiveness. You understand that leadership means protecting the people who depend on you, even when it's personally costly." She paused, studying my face with the analytical gaze that had probably intimidated foreign admirals during tense negotiations. "Those lessons will serve you well as an officer. But they'll also make your service more difficult, because you'll be surrounded by people who don't share your understanding of what military service really means. You'll encounter officers who prioritize their careers over their responsibilities, contractors who prioritize profits over soldier safety, politicians who prioritize publicity over genuine support for the military. Like Connor. Connor is just one example of a broader problem. The military exists within a larger society that often doesn't understand the depth of commitment required for genuine service. Your challenge as an officer will be maintaining your integrity while working within systems that don't always reward integrity." It was a sobering assessment, but one that resonated with my observations during deployment. I'd seen officers who seemed more concerned with their efficiency reports than their soldiers' welfare, contractors whose equipment performed adequately during demonstrations but failed under actual combat conditions, political leaders who supported military operations in public while cutting funding for the resources those operations required. How do you maintain that integrity? By remembering why you're serving, by focusing on the people who depend on your decisions, rather than the people who evaluate your performance. By understanding that real leadership means being willing to sacrifice your career to protect your responsibilities. Admiral Brennan stood and walked to the window overlooking the base, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture I'd seen countless times during my childhood. "There's something else I want you to understand," she continued. This week's events have damaged my relationship with Connor, possibly permanently. But they've also clarified something important about you. You have the character and judgment necessary for significant leadership responsibilities. You have the integrity to choose what's right over what's convenient. Those qualities are rare, and the Navy needs officers who possess them. What are you saying? She turned back to face me, her expression mixing maternal pride with professional assessment. I'm saying that your potential as an officer extends far beyond anything Connor could achieve in the civilian world. You could command ships, lead task forces, influence policy decisions that affect thousands of service members. You could make the kind of difference that justifies every sacrifice you've made and every challenge you'll face. The scope of what she was describing was almost overwhelming. I'd enlisted as an 18-year-old looking for direction and purpose. The possibility that I could someday hold positions of significant responsibility, that I could influence decisions affecting the lives and safety of other service members, represented a level of impact I'd never imagined. The path won't be easy, Admiral Brennan continued. Officer Candidate School is designed to challenge everything you think you know about leadership and responsibility. Your first assignments will test your ability to translate your combat experience into effective peacetime leadership. You'll face situations where there are no clear right answers, where every decision involves weighing competing responsibilities and uncertain outcomes. But it's worth it? For someone with your character and abilities? Absolutely. The Navy and the country needs officers who understand what service really means, who've earned their authority through competence and sacrifice, rather than connections and politics. As I prepared to leave her office, Admiral Brennan handed me a thick folder marked with official seals. Your Officer Candidate School application packet, she explained. I've already completed my portions of the paperwork, including detailed recommendations based on your service record and the events of this week. I've also included letters from several of the officers who testified at your ceremony. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. Earning your commission will be the easy part. Living up to the responsibilities that come with it, that's the real challenge. That evening, I sat in my quarters reviewing the application materials Admiral Brennan had prepared. The paperwork was exhaustive, requiring detailed information about my background, my motivations for seeking a commission, my understanding of the obligations and expectations associated with officer rank. But what struck me most was the letter of recommendation my mother had written, a document that went far beyond the standard military evaluation format to provide a comprehensive assessment of my character, my potential, and my suitability for positions of significant responsibility. Sergeant Brennan, the letter began, possesses the rare combination of technical competence, moral courage, and genuine commitment to others that characterizes the finest military officers. Her performance under combat conditions demonstrates not only her ability to function effectively under pressure, but her instinctive understanding that leadership means prioritizing the welfare of others over personal safety or convenience. The letter went on to describe my response to Connor's accusations, my handling of the public ceremony, my demonstration of grace under pressure and dignity in the face of betrayal. But what moved me most was the final paragraph. In 30 years of military service, I have encountered few individuals who so clearly embody the values and character necessary for successful military leadership. Sergeant Brennan understands that authority must be earned through competence and integrity, that responsibility extends beyond immediate duties to encompass the long-term welfare of those who serve under her command. She represents the finest traditions of military service, and I recommend her for commissioning without reservation. The woman who'd built her career on precise language and careful evaluation had committed her professional reputation to supporting my advancement. It was both humbling and inspiring, a reminder that the events of the past week had been about more than family dysfunction or personal vindication. As I prepared for sleep, I thought about Connor, alone in his expensive house with his prestigious job and his mounting realization that he'd chosen the wrong side of a conflict he'd created. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for him: congressional investigations, media scrutiny, professional obligations that would force him to defend the indefensible. But I also thought about the life I was choosing, the commitment I was making to something larger than personal comfort or advancement. Officer Candidate School would test every assumption I had about leadership and responsibility. My early assignments would challenge my ability to translate combat experience into effective peacetime leadership. The career ahead would demand sacrifices I couldn't yet imagine. Yet I felt a certainty I hadn't experienced since deciding to enlist 6 years earlier. The uniform represented something permanent in a world of constant change, something meaningful in an environment often dominated by superficial measures of success. I belonged among people who understood that real achievement couldn't be stolen from others, that genuine honor had to be earned through competence and sacrifice. Connor could keep his corporate salary and his suburban lifestyle. I had something he could never take away and would never understand: the knowledge that I'd chosen a life of genuine service over personal convenience, that I'd earned my place among people who measured success by their willingness to sacrifice for others. The bronze star on my nightstand caught the last rays of sunlight filtering through the blinds, its ribbon a reminder of 17 minutes under fire, when the only thing that mattered was keeping another soldier breathing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to prove that some things were more important than personal comfort or family approval. I was ready for whatever came next. 6 weeks after the ceremony, I was standing in the corridor outside a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., watching Connor adjust his tie with hands that trembled slightly. The marble hallways of the Rayburn House office building echoed with the footsteps of staffers, lobbyists, and journalists preparing for what the media had dubbed the Millennium Defense Hearings. Connor hadn't seen me yet, but I could observe the toll that recent weeks had taken on him: the weight loss, the nervous energy, the way he kept checking his phone as if hoping for salvation that wouldn't come. The irony of my presence in the Capitol wasn't lost on me. I was there as a witness for the congressional investigation into defense contractor misconduct, specifically to testify about equipment failures I'd observed during my deployment. Connor was there as a corporate representative trying to defend the indefensible. We were on opposite sides of a conflict that had begun with family betrayal and escalated into a matter of national security. Zoe sat beside me on one of the wooden benches that lined the corridor, reviewing her own notes for the testimony she'd give later in the day. She'd been accepted to officer candidate school along with me, and we were scheduled to report to Newport, Rhode Island, in 3 weeks. The timing meant we'd be entering OCS with the knowledge that our testimony had contributed to what was shaping up to be one of the most significant defense contractor scandals in recent memory. "You don't have to watch this," Zoe said quietly, noticing my attention focused on Connor's increasingly agitated preparation routine. "Yes, I do," I replied. "I need to see how this ends." The hearing room doors opened, and staff members began allowing witnesses and spectators to enter. Connor disappeared inside with a group of Millennium Defense executives and their legal team, all of them wearing the kind of expensive suits that suggested they were accustomed to navigating high-stakes government investigations. I waited until the corporate contingent had been seated before entering with the military witnesses who'd been called to testify about equipment failures. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, but it carried the weight of institutional authority that came with decades of congressional oversight. Representatives from both parties sat behind an elevated desk arrangement, while witness tables faced them across a space designed to emphasize the power differential between those asking questions and those providing answers. Television cameras lined the walls, their red recording lights creating an atmosphere of heightened scrutiny that made every gesture feel significant. Committee Chairman Representative Sarah Chen called the hearing to order with the kind of gravitas that suggested she understood the broader implications of the day's testimony. The opening statements established the scope of the investigation: systematic failures by Millennium Defense contractors to provide reliable equipment to combat forces, falsified testing data, and a pattern of prioritizing profit margins over soldier safety. The men and women who serve our nation in combat zones, Representative Chen announced, deserve equipment they can trust with their lives. When defense contractors fail to meet that standard, when they prioritize corporate profits over military effectiveness, they betray not just their contractual obligations but their fundamental duty to the American people. Connor sat at the defendant's table with his company's executives, his expression carefully controlled but his posture betraying the tension he was trying to hide. This was his first major public appearance since joining Millennium Defense, and the weight of representing a company under intense congressional scrutiny was clearly affecting him. The first round of testimony came from military procurement officials who described the testing failures that should have disqualified Millennium Defense equipment from deployment. The technical details were damning: communication systems that lost signal reliability in dust storm conditions, body armor that failed to meet ballistic standards, navigation equipment that malfunctioned when exposed to the temperature variations common in desert environments. Then came the personal testimony from soldiers who'd experienced these failures firsthand. Staff Sergeant Williams described the radio malfunction that had prevented his unit from calling in medical evacuation for wounded soldiers. Corporal Martinez testified about body armor that had failed during a firefight, leaving him with injuries that could have been prevented. Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke about navigation equipment that had led his convoy into an ambush because the GPS coordinates were consistently inaccurate. Each story built upon the previous one, creating a comprehensive picture of a company that had systematically failed to deliver equipment that met the minimum standards for combat effectiveness. But more than that, the testimony revealed the human cost of corporate negligence: real soldiers injured or killed because executives had chosen profit margins over product reliability. When my turn came to testify, I approached the witness table with the same calm focus I'd used during medical emergencies in Afghanistan. The representatives' questions were direct and specific, asking me to describe the communication failures I'd witnessed during convoy operations, the body armor defects I'd observed during casualty treatment, the navigation errors that had complicated medical evacuation procedures. Sergeant Brennan. Representative Chen asked, "In your professional opinion as a combat medic who worked extensively with Millennium Defense equipment, how would you characterize the company's commitment to soldier safety?" I glanced across the room at Connor before answering, seeing him lean forward slightly as he waited for my response. "Ma'am, in my experience, Millennium Defense equipment consistently failed to perform under the conditions for which it was supposedly designed. These weren't random malfunctions or acceptable variations in performance. They were systematic failures that suggested the equipment had never been properly tested for combat deployment. Can you provide specific examples?" I described the radio failures during the convoy attack that had killed 3 soldiers, the body armor defects that had contributed to preventable casualties, the navigation errors that had delayed medical evacuations and cost additional lives. Each example was documented in military incident reports, corroborated by other witnesses, and directly traceable to Millennium Defense equipment failures. Based on your combat experience, Representative Chen continued, what impact did these equipment failures have on mission effectiveness and soldier morale? Ma'am, when soldiers can't trust their equipment, they can't focus entirely on their mission. They have to constantly compensate for gear that might malfunction at critical moments. That divided attention can be the difference between life and death in combat situations. The hearing recessed for lunch, and I found myself in the corridor again, this time approached by Connor, who looked like he'd aged years during the morning's testimony. The confident executive who'd attacked my military service 6 weeks earlier had been replaced by someone who clearly understood the gravity of the situation he'd stumbled into. "Hazel," he said, his voice carrying none of the arrogance I remembered from our last conversation. "Can we talk privately?" I followed him to a small conference room down the hall, wondering what he could possibly say that would explain or excuse his behavior over the past months. When he closed the door behind us, his carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "I didn't know," he said, sitting heavily in one of the conference room chairs. "When I took the job with Millennium Defense, I thought I was joining a respectable defense contractor. I had no idea about the equipment failures, the falsified testing data, the cover-ups." "You knew enough to attack my Bronze Star," I replied. "You knew enough to use Mom's authority to cancel my homecoming. That wasn't about the company. That was about—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was struggling with problems he couldn't solve. "God, Hazel, I was jealous. You came home a war hero with a Bronze Star and national recognition, and I was just another business school graduate working for a tech startup. When Millennium Defense offered me the regional director position, it felt like my chance to be important, to serve the country in my own way. By attacking someone who actually had served, I convinced myself that military service was just another form of performance, That your medal was more about being in the right place at the right time than genuine heroism. It was easier to believe that than to accept that you'd accomplished something I never could. The honesty was startling, particularly coming from someone who'd spent weeks defending lies and attacking my character. But it was also too late to change anything that had already happened. What did you think would happen when you joined a defense contractor? I asked. Did you imagine you'd never have to face the consequences of their business practices? I thought defense contractors were like any other corporate employer. I figured they had government oversight, quality control processes, professional standards. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a congressional hearing trying to defend equipment that got soldiers killed. The naivety was almost breathtaking. Connor had accepted a high-paying position with a defense contractor without researching their track record, their corporate culture, or their relationship with the military they were supposed to support. He'd been attracted by the salary and the prestige without considering the moral implications of profiting from military contracts. So what are you going to do now? I don't know, he admitted. I can't quit. I'm financially committed to this job for at least 2 years, but I can't keep defending practices that I know are wrong. This afternoon's testimony is going to be even worse than this morning's. He was right about the afternoon session. The Congressional Committee had saved their most damaging evidence for after lunch. Internal Millennium Defense documents obtained through subpoena that showed company executives had known about equipment failures and chosen to conceal them rather than address them. Email chains revealed discussions about quote 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 rather than human tragedies. Connor was called to testify during the afternoon session, and I watched from the gallery as he faced questions about his role in representing a company whose practices he was clearly struggling to defend. Representative Chen was particularly pointed in her questioning, asking him to explain how Millennium Defense could justify continuing to market equipment they knew was likely to fail under combat conditions. Mr. Brennan, she said, you've been with Millennium Defense for approximately 2 months. During that time, have you become aware of any internal discussions regarding equipment reliability issues? Connor glanced toward his company's legal team before answering, clearly caught between his professional obligations and his personal integrity. Yes, ma'am. I've attended meetings where equipment performance was discussed. And what was the company's position regarding reports of field failures? The company position was that combat conditions are inherently unpredictable, and that equipment performance in those conditions can't be guaranteed to match laboratory testing results. Mr. Brennan, are you aware that your sister, Sergeant Hazel Brennan, testified this morning about specific equipment failures that contributed to military casualties? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Connor's face flushed as he realized the committee had deliberately structured the hearing to highlight the personal dimension of the case. A defense contractor executive whose own sister had witnessed the deadly consequences of his company's negligence. Yes, ma'am, I'm aware of her testimony. Do you believe Sergeant Brennan's account of equipment failures was accurate? It was a moment of pure reckoning. Connor could support his employer's narrative that equipment failures were unavoidable, or he could acknowledge the truth his sister had spoken under oath. The choice would define not just his professional future, but his character as a human being. Based on my sister's record of integrity and her first-hand experience with Millennium Defense equipment in combat situations, I believe her testimony was accurate. The admission sent a ripple of surprise through the hearing room. Connor had essentially contradicted his own company's position, acknowledging that their equipment had indeed failed in ways that contributed to military casualties. His legal team looked stunned, while the congressional representatives leaned forward with obvious interest. Mr. Brennan, given your belief that Sergeant Brennan's testimony was accurate, how do you reconcile that with your company's continued marketing of equipment you apparently believe to be unreliable? Connor sat in silence for nearly 30 seconds, clearly wrestling with a question that had no good answer. Finally, he spoke. I can't reconcile it, ma'am. If our equipment contributed to preventable military casualties, then we have a moral obligation to address those failures, rather than defending them as unavoidable. The response effectively ended Connor's career with Millennium Defense. Within minutes of the hearing's conclusion, he was approached by company executives who informed him that his employment would be terminated immediately. The legal team made it clear that he could expect to face breach of contract litigation, professional blacklisting, and financial consequences that would follow him for years. But as I watched him gather his papers and walk out of the hearing room, I saw something in his posture that had been missing for months: the basic dignity that comes from choosing integrity over convenience, truth over personal advantage. He'd finally demonstrated the kind of character that military service had taught me to value above personal comfort or professional success. Outside the Capitol building, Connor found me waiting by the reflecting pool that stretched between the building and the street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water, and the weight of the day's events seemed to settle on both of us as we stood in silence for several minutes. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not just for today, but for everything. For attacking your service, for canceling your homecoming, for using Mom's authority without permission, for letting jealousy and insecurity turn me into someone I didn't recognize. I know you are." "What happens now? With us, I mean." "With the family." It was a fair question, one I'd been considering throughout the day's testimony. Connor had betrayed my trust, attacked my honor, and tried to undermine the most important achievement of my adult life. But he'd also just sacrificed his career to acknowledge the truth, demonstrating the kind of moral courage that I'd been taught to respect above personal loyalty. "That depends on you," I said. "On whether you've learned something from this experience, or whether you're just sorry you got caught. I've learned that there are worse things than being unsuccessful. There are worse things than being overshadowed by your sister's achievements. Being complicit in practices that get soldiers killed. That's worse than anything I was afraid of before." We walked together toward the metro station, two siblings who'd been raised in the same house but had taken radically different paths to understanding what service and sacrifice really meant. Connor would face financial ruin, professional ostracism, and years of rebuilding his career from the ground up. But he'd also taken the first step toward becoming someone who could value integrity over personal advancement. "Will you tell Mom and Dad what happened today?" he asked as we reached the subway entrance. "I'll tell them you chose to tell the truth when it mattered most," I said. "What they do with that information is up to them." 3 weeks later, I stood in the processing center at Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island, surrounded by 93 other candidates who'd been selected for commissioning as Navy officers. We came from diverse backgrounds: college graduates, enlisted personnel seeking advancement, professionals from civilian careers who decided to serve their country in uniform. But we shared a common commitment to something larger than personal success: a willingness to accept responsibility for the lives and welfare of other service members. The letter from Connor had arrived the day before I left for OCS, written in his careful handwriting on plain stationery that suggested he was learning to live without corporate luxuries. He'd found work as a project manager for a small environmental consulting firm, earning a fraction of his previous salary but sleeping better at night knowing that his work didn't contribute to preventable deaths. "Hazel," the letter read, "I know that apologies can't undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that your example, both during deployment and during the congressional hearings, taught me something important about the difference between genuine service and empty performance. You've earned the right to wear the uniform through courage and sacrifice. I hope someday I can earn the right to call myself your brother again." As I prepared for the physical and mental challenges of officer candidate school, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months of combat deployment, where I'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. A family crisis that had tested my understanding of loyalty, integrity, and the true meaning of service. A brother's betrayal that had forced me to articulate and defend everything I believed about honor and sacrifice. Each experience had prepared me for the responsibilities that lay ahead, leading other people's children in situations where my decisions could mean the difference between life and death, accepting accountability for outcomes beyond my direct control, maintaining integrity in an institution that didn't always reward moral courage over political convenience. The drill instructors who would guide us through the next 12 weeks of training were already assembling in the courtyard outside our barracks, their bearing and demeanor reflecting the standards we'd be expected to meet. They would test our physical fitness, our mental resilience, our ability to function under pressure, and our commitment to placing service above self-interest. But the real test had already begun the moment I'd decided to pursue a commission. It would continue throughout my career as I faced the daily choice between personal comfort and professional responsibility, between advancing my own interests and protecting the welfare of those who served under my command. Standing in that processing center, surrounded by other candidates who'd made similar commitments, I felt the same certainty I'd experienced during the most challenging moments of my deployment. I belonged here, among people who understood that real leadership couldn't be achieved through politics or connections, but only through competence, integrity, and genuine concern for others. The uniform I'd wear as an officer would represent everything Connor had tried to question and attack. The idea that some achievements couldn't be stolen or diminished, that honor had to be earned through sacrifice, that the greatest success came from serving something larger than yourself. As the processing continued and we prepared for our first formation as officer candidates, I thought about the soldiers whose lives I'd helped save in Afghanistan, the family members who'd supported me through the crisis with Connor, and the future service members whose welfare would become my responsibility once I earned my commission. Each of them deserved leaders who understood the weight of military authority, who'd earned their rank through demonstrated competence rather than inherited privilege, who would never forget that the most important measure of success was the number of people who came home safely because of decisions made by those in command. The journey from enlisted medic to commissioned officer would test everything I thought I knew about leadership and responsibility. But it would also provide opportunities to influence the systems that determined how well the military served both its members and the nation they protected. Connor had chosen the path of corporate comfort over meaningful service, then discovered that some compromises cost more than the benefits they provided. I was choosing a path that would demand constant sacrifice, but offer the possibility of making a genuine difference in the lives of people who mattered. As we formed our first ranks as officer candidates, I understood that the real homecoming wasn't the ceremony that had been planned and canceled and ultimately restored. The real homecoming was this moment, joining the ranks of people who'd committed their lives to something permanent and meaningful in a world that often prioritized temporary advantage over lasting values. The drill instructor's voice cut through the afternoon air with commands that would become as familiar as breathing over the next 12 weeks. But beneath the shouted orders and military precision was something more fundamental, the beginning of a transformation that would prepare us to serve as commissioned officers in situations we couldn't yet imagine. I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that the trials of recent months had taught me everything I needed to know about the difference between genuine achievement and empty performance, real service and hollow patriotism, family bonds based on shared values rather than mere genetics. The bronze star on my uniform caught the late afternoon sunlight as we marched toward our first day of training, a reminder of 17 minutes under fire when the only thing that mattered was keeping another soldier breathing. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new responsibilities, new opportunities to prove that honor and integrity couldn't be questioned by those who'd never earned the right to judge them. But tonight, standing among 93 other candidates who'd chosen service over comfort, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood, the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, surrounded by people who understood what it meant to serve something larger than themselves. 2 years later, I stood on the bridge of the USS Constellation, watching the sun rise over the Pacific as our destroyer cut through waters that reflected the morning sky like polished steel. The ship beneath my feet hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-trained crew preparing for another day of operations in international waters. As the assistant operations officer, I was responsible for coordinating the complex dance of radar systems, communication networks, and navigation equipment that kept our vessel safe and mission-ready in some of the most contested waters on Earth. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now helping to oversee the very types of systems that had failed so catastrophically during my deployment in Afghanistan. But these systems worked, tested rigorously, maintained meticulously, operated by sailors who understood that equipment failure at sea could mean the difference between successful operations and international incidents. Lieutenant Brennan called out Petty Officer Martinez from the communications station. "We're receiving priority traffic from COMPACFLT. Commander Pacific Fleet traffic meant something significant was developing. possibly another in the series of freedom of navigation operations that had become routine in the South China Sea. I walked over to review the message traffic, noting the classification level and the distribution list that included our ship among several others in the region. Operations brief at 0800, I told Martinez, make sure all department heads are notified. The past 24 months had transformed my understanding of military service in ways I hadn't anticipated when I'd walked through the gates of officer candidate school. OCS had been demanding 12 weeks of physical challenges, academic requirements, and leadership exercises designed to test every assumption about authority and responsibility. But it had also been clarifying, stripping away civilian habits and replacing them with the disciplined thinking necessary for commissioned service. My first assignment aboard the Constellation had been both humbling and educational. Despite my combat experience as an enlisted medic, leading sailors required different skills than treating wounded soldiers. I'd had to learn how to translate battlefield lessons into peacetime leadership, how to maintain crew readiness during long deployments, how to balance compassion with the demands of military discipline. The morning brief revealed that our ship would be joining a task force conducting exercises with allied navies near the Philippines, routine operations designed to maintain regional stability and demonstrate America's commitment to maritime security. But routine operations in contested waters were never truly routine, and the complex coordination required would test every system and every sailor aboard our vessel. As I prepared for my shift, I thought about the letter I'd received from Tyler the previous week. He'd completed his first year at the Naval Academy and was thriving in an environment that rewarded the dedication and integrity our family had always valued. His midshipman summers would include training aboard ships like the Constellation, learning the practical skills that would prepare him for his own commissioned service. The best part, he'd written, is being around people who understand why we serve. Nobody here joined for the money or the prestige. They're here because they want to be part of something that matters, something that's bigger than their own ambitions. His words had reminded me of my own transformation from skeptical 18-year-old to commissioned officer. The military attracted people for many reasons, but it retained only those who found genuine meaning in service to others, who discovered that personal fulfillment came through contributing to missions that extended far beyond individual achievement. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a photo that made me smile despite the early hour. Dad and Mom standing in their dress clothes outside a small venue in Bellingham, both of them wearing expressions of quiet pride. The caption read, "Tyler's commissioning ceremony next month. Hope you can get leave to attend." Tyler's commissioning. My youngest brother would soon take the oath of office that I'd sworn 2 years earlier, accepting the same responsibilities and challenges that had shaped my adult life. The family that had been fractured by Connor's betrayal was being rebuilt around shared values and mutual respect, rather than genetic obligation. Another message followed, this one from Connor himself. Over the past year, we'd exchanged occasional communications as he worked to rebuild his career and reputation following the Millennium Defense scandal. His environmental consulting work had led to a position with a non-profit organization focused on veteran employment assistance, meaningful work that allowed him to contribute to the military community he'd once attacked. Hazel, his message read, I know this might be presumptuous, but I'd like to attend Tyler's commissioning if the family thinks it's appropriate. I want to see him take the oath, and I want him to know that his oldest brother finally understands what real service looks like. The request represented how much Connor had changed since the congressional hearings. The ambitious executive who'd prioritized corporate advancement over family loyalty had been replaced by someone who recognized that respect had to be earned through character, rather than claimed through entitlement. I forwarded his message to Admiral Brennan with a simple note, "Your call, but I think he's learned something important." Her response came within minutes. Connor will be welcome at Tyler's ceremony. Family means supporting each other's growth, even when that growth comes through painful lessons. The day passed in the controlled chaos of naval operations. Navigation updates, equipment maintenance, training exercises that kept our crew sharp and ready for whatever challenges we might face. During the afternoon watch, I found myself standing on the observation deck, looking out over an ocean that stretched to the horizon in every direction. This was what I'd been seeking without knowing it during those uncertain months after my return from Afghanistan. Not just a career or a paycheck, but a place within something permanent and meaningful. The ocean would outlast every political change, every social trend, every temporary crisis that dominated civilian news cycles. The mission of maintaining maritime security, protecting international commerce, and demonstrating American resolve would continue long after current events had been forgotten. Beautiful evening, Lieutenant. I turned to find Commander Patricia Valdez, our executive officer, joining me at the rail. Commander Valdez had been one of the officers who'd testified at my homecoming ceremony 2 years earlier, and she'd become both a professional mentor and a friend during my time aboard the Constellation. Yes, ma'am. I was just thinking about how different this is from Afghanistan. Different mission, same principles, she replied. Taking care of your people, accomplishing the objective, maintaining the standards that make everything else possible. Commander Valdez had deployed to Afghanistan twice during her career, once as a junior officer and once as a department head. She understood the transition from combat operations to peacetime service, the challenge of maintaining readiness without the immediate urgency that characterized deployment conditions. Any regrets about choosing this path? She asked. None, I replied without hesitation. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Good. Because you're doing exceptional work, and the Navy needs officers who understand what service really means. Have you given any thought to your next assignment? The question every junior officer faced as their current tour neared completion. My time aboard the Constellation would end in 6 months, and the Navy would offer opportunities for specialized training, advanced education, or new operational assignments that would continue my professional development. I've been considering the Naval War College, I said. Advanced education in strategy and policy, preparation for more senior responsibilities. Excellent choice. Your combination of combat experience and operational expertise would serve you well in a strategic role. The Navy needs officers who can bridge the gap between tactical operations and strategic planning. We stood in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reflected off the water like scattered jewels. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the ship's announcing system, calling all department heads to the bridge for an urgent brief. Inside the ship's Combat Information Center, Captain Morrison was reviewing message traffic with an expression that suggested significant developments. The assembled department heads waited while he finished reading, then looked up with the kind of focused attention that preceded important announcements. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we've received orders for an unscheduled mission that will test everything we've been training for. A commercial vessel has reported mechanical difficulties approximately 200 miles southwest of our current position. Weather conditions are deteriorating and Rescue Coordination Center has requested our assistance. Maritime search and rescue operations were among the most challenging missions any naval vessel could undertake. Success required precise coordination between multiple departments, flawless execution of complex procedures, and the kind of seamless teamwork that could only be developed through extensive training and absolute trust in each other's competence. Lieutenant Brennan, Captain Morrison continued, you'll be coordinating communications with the distressed vessel, Rescue Coordination Center, and any other assets that join the operation. This is exactly the kind of mission that justifies our presence in these waters. The next 18 hours tested every system and every sailor aboard our ship. The commercial vessel, a Filipino cargo ship carrying construction materials to ports throughout Southeast Asia, had suffered engine failure during a tropical storm that made traditional rescue operations extremely dangerous. Our ship's helicopter was grounded by weather conditions, meaning we'd have to conduct the rescue using small boats in seas that were marginal for such operations. I spent those hours in the communications center, maintaining contact with the distressed vessel while coordinating with rescue aircraft from multiple nations and surface ships that were converging on our position. The Filipino crew spoke limited English, requiring careful attention to ensure that critical information was accurately transmitted and understood. USS Constellation, this is Merchant Vessel Maria Santos, came the heavily accented voice of the cargo ship's captain. We are taking on water in engine room. Request immediate assistance. Taking on water changed everything. What had been a routine towing operation became a race against time to save 23 sailors whose ship was slowly sinking in heavy seas. Captain Morrison ordered our rescue teams to prepare for the most challenging conditions they'd faced during their careers. "Maria Santos, this is USS Constellation," I responded. "We are approximately 30 minutes from your position. Maintain course and speed if possible. Prepare your crew for potential evacuation." The rescue operation that followed demonstrated everything I'd learned about naval service during my 2 years as a commissioned officer. Petty Officer Martinez coordinated radar tracking to maintain precise positioning relative to the sinking vessel. Bosun's Mate Chen led the small boat crews that would perform the actual evacuation. Hospital Corpsman Rodriguez prepared medical facilities for potential casualties. Each sailor performed their assigned duties with the kind of competence that could only be developed through months of training and absolute confidence in their equipment. Unlike the failed Millennium defense systems I'd witnessed in Afghanistan, every radio worked perfectly. Every navigation system provided accurate information. Every piece of safety equipment functioned exactly as designed. The evacuation itself was conducted in conditions that would have been impossible without perfect coordination between multiple teams operating in dangerous circumstances. High winds and heavy seas made maintaining position alongside the Maria Santos extremely challenging, while the language barrier required constant attention to ensure that critical communications were properly understood. But the most remarkable aspect of the operation was watching young sailors, many of them on their first deployment, perform with the kind of calm professionalism that characterized the finest naval traditions. Seaman Williams, barely 20 years old, operated rescue equipment with steady hands, despite being seasoned by conditions that would have overwhelmed most civilians. Petty Officer Johnson maintained perfect radio discipline while coordinating between multiple rescue assets in circumstances that demanded split-second timing. Within 4 hours, all 23 members of the Maria Santos crew had been safely transferred to our ship. The cargo vessel sank shortly after the final evacuation, taking with it millions of dollars in construction materials, but leaving behind 23 sailors who would return home to their families. Because American naval personnel had risked their own safety to perform a mission that transcended national boundaries. As we set course for the nearest port to transfer the rescued sailors, I found myself thinking about the contrast between this operation and the equipment failures that had characterized my deployment in Afghanistan. Here, every system had worked exactly as designed because they'd been properly tested, adequately maintained, and operated by personnel who understood their critical importance. The rescued Filipino sailors were treated with the same care and attention that we would have provided to American citizens, given medical attention, food, and clothing while arrangements were made for their repatriation. Their gratitude was evident despite the language barrier, expressed through gestures and broken English that conveyed their understanding of what our crew had risked to save their lives. Lieutenant Brennan, Captain Morrison called me to his cabin after the rescued sailors had been settled in temporary quarters. "Outstanding work during the rescue operation. Your coordination was flawless, and your attention to detail probably saved lives." "Thank you, sir." The crew performed exceptionally well. They did, and that's partly because they had confidence in the communications coordination that allowed them to focus on their individual responsibilities. That kind of seamless operation doesn't happen by accident. It requires officers who understand how all the pieces fit together. Captain Morrison opened a folder on his desk and removed several documents marked with official seals. "I'm recommending you for the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for your performance during this operation. But more importantly, I'm endorsing your application for the Naval War College with the strongest possible recommendation." The commendation was gratifying, but the endorsement for advanced education represented something more significant. Recognition that I was being prepared for increased responsibilities and more complex challenges. The Naval War College would provide strategic education that would prepare me for positions where my decisions could affect not just individual sailors but entire operations and policy directions. 6 months later, I stood in the graduation ceremony at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, receiving my diploma in strategic studies, while Admiral Brennan watched from the audience with obvious pride. The advanced education had expanded my understanding of how military operations fit within broader diplomatic and economic contexts, how strategic decisions were made at the highest levels of government, and how individual competence contributed to national security objectives. After the ceremony, Admiral Brennan and I walked through the historic campus where naval officers had been educated for more than a century. The brick buildings and tree-lined pathways represented institutional continuity that connected current officers with the naval traditions that had shaped American maritime power since the nation's founding. "I have news," Admiral Brennan said as we paused beside the memorial wall that honored Naval War College graduates who died in service to their country. "Tyler's been selected for summer training aboard the USS Independence. He'll be learning the same operational skills you mastered aboard the Constellation." "He'll do well," I replied, knowing that Tyler possessed the same combination of intelligence and dedication that had characterized successful naval officers throughout our family's military history. "There's something else," Admiral Brennan continued. "Connor's nonprofit organization has been selected to provide employment assistance services at several major naval installations. He'll be helping transitioning veterans find meaningful civilian careers, work that allows him to contribute to the military community in a positive way." Connor's journey from defense contractor executive to veteran employment advocate represented the kind of personal transformation that was possible when someone genuinely learned from their mistakes. His work would help ensure that sailors transitioning to civilian life found opportunities that matched their skills and values, rather than simply accepting whatever employment was immediately available. "And you," Admiral Brennan said, turning to face me with an expression that mixed maternal pride with professional assessment, "have been selected for assignment to the Pentagon Strategic Planning Office, working on policy development for naval operations in contested environments." The Pentagon assignment represented a significant advancement in responsibility and influence. Strategic planning officers helped shape the policies that determined how the Navy would respond to international challenges, how resources would be allocated, and how operational lessons would be incorporated into future planning. It's an opportunity to influence the systems that determine how well we support sailors in dangerous situations. Admiral Brennan continued. "Everything you learned during your deployment, everything you experienced during the Millennium Defense Investigation, everything you've observed during your operational tours, that knowledge will help ensure that future service members have the equipment and support they need to accomplish their missions safely." Standing on that campus where naval officers had been prepared for strategic responsibility since 1884, I understood that my career had brought me full circle from the young enlisted medic who'd saved lives in Afghanistan to a commissioned officer positioned to influence policies. The Bronze Star I'd earned through 17 minutes under fire had been questioned by someone who'd never served, defended by an admiral who understood what honor meant, and validated by a congressional investigation that exposed the difference between genuine heroism and corporate performance. But its real significance wasn't the recognition it represented. It was the reminder that individual competence and courage could make a difference in situations where lives hung in the balance. 3 years later, I sat in a Pentagon conference room reviewing policy recommendations for equipment testing standards that would prevent future repetitions of the Millennium Defense scandal. The work was complex and often tedious, involving detailed analysis of technical specifications and procurement procedures that most people would find unbearably boring. But each regulation we strengthened, each testing requirement we enhanced, each accountability measure we implemented represented lives that would be saved by ensuring that future soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines received equipment they could trust in combat situations. The abstract policy work had very concrete implications for people serving in dangerous environments around the world. A knock at my office door interrupted my review of the latest draft regulations. Lieutenant Commander Torres, my deputy for procurement policy, entered with a folder marked with classification stamps and a slightly puzzled expression. "Ma'am, we've received a request for consultation on a personnel matter. Apparently, someone in Naval Personnel Command wants your input on an officer candidate who's applying for commissioning with a somewhat unusual background." Unusual backgrounds weren't uncommon among officer candidates. The Navy drew applicants from diverse civilian careers, enlisted service, and educational experiences. But requests for consultation from strategic planning were relatively rare unless the candidate had experience relevant to our policy work. "What kind of unusual background?" environmental consulting, and veteran employment advocacy. The candidate's older sibling is apparently a Navy lieutenant commander with expertise in procurement policy. Personnel Command wants to know if the family connection creates any conflicts of interest. I opened the folder and immediately recognized the name on the application, Connor Brennan. My brother, now 32 years old, was applying for commissioning as a Navy officer through the Direct Commission Program that allowed qualified professionals to enter active duty in specialized roles. His application was impressive in ways I wouldn't have expected 5 years earlier. Advanced degrees in environmental science and public administration. 3 years of successful program management for veteran employment services. Recommendations from senior military officers who'd worked with his nonprofit organization. A personal statement that demonstrated clear understanding of military values and genuine commitment to service. The applicant's older sibling is Lieutenant Commander Hazel Brennan, I told Lieutenant Commander Torres. And no, there's no conflict of interest. In fact, I think the Navy would benefit from having someone with his background in our environmental and veteran affairs programs. Connor's transformation from defense contractor executive to veteran advocate to potential naval officer represented the kind of personal growth that was possible when someone genuinely learned from their mistakes and committed to making positive contributions. His work with transitioning veterans had given him insights into the challenges facing military families and the importance of supporting service members throughout their careers. 6 months later, I stood in the audience at the Officer Candidate School graduation ceremony in Newport, watching Connor take the oath of office that I'd sworn 7 years earlier and Tyler had taken 3 years before. The ceremony was smaller than the massive graduation I'd attended, reflecting the specialized nature of the Direct Commission Program, but it carried the same weight of commitment and responsibility. Admiral Brennan sat beside me, wearing her dress blue uniform with 4 stars that reflected a career spanning more than 3 decades of distinguished service. Tyler, now a lieutenant junior grade serving aboard a guided missile cruiser in the Western Pacific, had obtained leave to attend his brother's commissioning. Dad sat in the row behind us, his proud expression reflecting his satisfaction at seeing all 3 of his children choose military service. Connor's commissioning represented something more than family reconciliation or personal redemption. It demonstrated that the military's strength came not just from those who chose service as their first career, but from those who brought diverse experiences and hard-earned wisdom to the challenges of national defense. After the ceremony, our family gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking Narragansett Bay, the same waters where Tyler and I had learned to sail during childhood summers. The conversation flowed easily between professional updates, family news, and shared memories that no longer carried the sting of past conflicts. 7 years ago, Connor said during a quiet moment in the conversation, I attacked something I didn't understand because I was threatened by achievements I couldn't match. Tonight, I'm part of the same institution I once criticized, serving alongside people whose dedication I finally comprehend. What changed your mind? Tyler asked. Working with transitioning veterans taught me what military service actually means, Connor replied. Not the ceremonies or the recognition, but the daily choice to put others before yourself, to accept responsibility for outcomes beyond your control, to maintain standards even when it's personally costly. Admiral Brennan raised her wine glass in a toast that encompassed more than just Connor's commissioning. To service, to family, to the understanding that real achievement comes through contributing to something larger than ourselves. As we clinked glasses around the table, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The homecoming that Connor had tried to cancel had become the catalyst for transformations none of us could have anticipated. His betrayal had forced me to articulate and defend everything I believed about honor and service. My response had demonstrated the difference between genuine achievement and empty performance. The congressional investigation had exposed the consequences of prioritizing profit over principle. But most importantly, the crisis had revealed what family really meant. Not just genetic connection, but shared values, mutual support, and the willingness to stand by each other through difficult times. Connor had lost his way for a while, choosing corporate advancement over family loyalty, but he'd found his path again through meaningful work and genuine commitment to serving others. The military had been the catalyst for all of these changes, providing a framework for understanding service, sacrifice, and responsibility that transcended individual ambition. It had given me a career that offered daily opportunities to make a difference in situations that mattered. It had provided Tyler with a clear sense of purpose and direction during the transition from adolescence to adulthood. And it had offered Connor a chance to redeem himself through genuine contribution rather than empty gestures. 10 years later, I stood on the bridge of the USS Montgomery, now a commander responsible for leading a crew of 300 sailors in operations that spanned the globe from the Arctic Ocean to the South China Sea. The ship beneath my feet represented the culmination of everything I'd learned about leadership, responsibility, and the weight of command authority. The morning brief revealed our next mission, a complex multinational exercise involving allied navies from 6 countries, designed to maintain interoperability and demonstrate collective commitment to maritime security. The operation would test every system and every sailor aboard our vessel, requiring the kind of seamless coordination that could only be achieved through extensive training and absolute trust in each other's competence. As I reviewed the operational orders, I thought about the path that had brought me from enlisted medic to commanding officer, from someone who saved individual lives to someone responsible for hundreds of sailors and the successful completion of missions that affected international security. The Bronze Star still resided in my personal quarters, not as a symbol of past achievement, but as a reminder of the principles that guided my approach to leadership. The understanding that real success couldn't be measured by personal advancement, but only by the welfare of those who depended on my decisions. Connor was now a lieutenant commander serving as the Navy's liaison to veteran employment programs, using his experience with transitioning service members to improve the support systems that helped sailors find meaningful civilian careers. Tyler commanded a destroyer squadron in the Pacific Fleet, leading multiple ships in operations that maintained stability in one of the world's most contested regions. Admiral Brennan had retired after 35 years of distinguished service, but her influence continued through the officers she'd mentored and the policies she'd shaped during her tenure in senior positions. Her example of principled leadership and unwavering integrity had provided the foundation for everything our family had achieved in military service. The announcement came over the ship's communication system, calling all hands to stations for the beginning of our exercise operations. As I prepared to lead my crew through the complex maneuvers that would test our readiness and capability, I felt the same certainty I'd experienced during those crucial moments in Afghanistan, when the only thing that mattered was doing whatever was necessary to save lives. The uniform I wore as a commanding officer represented everything Connor had once questioned. The idea that some achievements couldn't be stolen or diminished, that honor had to be earned through competence and sacrifice, that the greatest success came from serving something larger than personal ambition. But it also represented the family values that had survived his betrayal and emerged stronger, the understanding that real loyalty meant supporting each other's growth, even when that growth came through painful lessons, that forgiveness was possible when it was accompanied by genuine change, that love meant holding each other accountable to the highest standards rather than accepting mediocrity. As the USS Montgomery got underway for another day of operations in service to our nation, I understood that the homecoming Connor had tried to cancel had never really been about a single ceremony or celebration. The real homecoming had been the gradual process of building a life around principles that mattered, relationships that endured, and work that made a genuine difference in the world. The ocean stretched to the horizon in every direction, vast and permanent and indifferent to the temporary concerns that dominated civilian life. But the ship beneath my feet was proof that human beings could impose order on chaos, create meaning through collective effort, and achieve lasting significance through dedicated service to others. That was the lesson Connor had finally learned, the understanding that had brought our family back together, and the foundation for everything we'd accomplished in the years since that difficult homecoming had become the catalyst for transformation none of us could have imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.